Hello, this is the second of my lockdown explorations in the history of English, and the topic this time is the verb ending S. Verb endings, maybe the very phrase sends shivers down your spine. Perhaps you have memories of school Latin, a mo, a mass, a mat and all that. Well, actually that's quite a good place to start, the Latin verb amare, meaning to love. Let's look at the present tense of it. It's written out on the left. Amo, amas, amat, amamus, amatis, amant. Those six forms are translated in the column on the right. I love, you love, he, she, it loves, we love, you love, and they love. And you can see that in the Latin there are different endings or suffixes for each of the persons. So I love is amo, he, she or it loves is amat, and so on. And I put those suffixes or endings in the second column. O, as, at, amus, atis and ant. Just in case you think that only dead languages are as complicated as that, I've put an example from another modern language, Croatian. And again, I've got the verb to love, and you can see that there are again 6 different forms for that verb. Volim, I love, volish, you love, singular, voli, he, she, it loves, volimo, volite, and vole. So again, you have 6 forms. In other words, modern languages can be just as complicated as old languages, dead languages. English, though, is rather easy. If you look at the English forms, all 6 of them, actually 5 of them are exactly the same. For I, for you, for we, for you, plural, and for they, it's always love. The only one that's exception is the third person singular, he, she or it, and that's the one that takes an S on the end, loves. We're going to focus on that final S ending on the third person singular of the present tense. Nearly all verbs have it. There are a few exceptions. For example, a verb like can, you can't say he cans, you say he can. And must, you don't say it musts, you say it must. Let's look at the history of it for a little bit. Let's go back to Old English. That's the version of English spoken from about the mid-5th century until the 11th century. And let's stay with the verb love that we've started with. Here it is. Here's the verb love in Old English. Lufie, lufast, lufath, lufiath, lufiath, lufiath. Those are the 6 persons. Notice that there is one unfamiliar letter there. It's the letter which is called eth, and it's roughly the equivalent to our th. So the third singular is lufath, and all the plural forms are lufiath. A couple of things to notice about these Old English forms. The first thing is that it's pretty complex. It's quite close to Latin and Croatian. Okay, the plural suffixes are the same, but the singular forms are all different from each other. It's nothing like as simple as the situation today in modern English. The second thing to notice is that third person singular is nothing like today's S. It's th, th. If you think about it, maybe it's a form that you're recognise from Shakespeare or from the Bible, from forms of Old English. He goeth, she blesseth, it cometh. That's the form we're talking about. In the time of Chaucer, that th was the common suffix for the third person singular. Here are some examples, all of them from Chaucer's poem Troilus and Cressida. The first one has the verb ginneth. The second one has the verb disblameth. Then there's a faileth, a happeth and a listeneth. So, in Chaucer's day, the th form was in common use in the southern part of England, which is where Chaucer lived. But there's a little cluster in Chaucer where you don't have the th form at all, and it comes from the Canterbury Tales story called The Reeve's Tale. And here are 4 examples from there. How fares thy fair doctor? Fares with an S. Behoves in the second sentence, wags in the third sentence, and falls in the fourth sentence. How come? How is it that in all of Chaucer, more or less, except for here, you have th forms and suddenly he goes into s forms? The answer lies in who the speakers are at these points in the Reeve's Tale. And the answer is they're students who came from the north of England. In fact, they probably came from the northeast area of England that used to be called Northumbria. And they spoke with broad northern accents. This tells us where the S ending comes from. It was the Northumbrian dialect of English. To track how that S came into Northumbrian, we need to go back to older Scandinavian and Germanic languages. Languages like the one that was brought by the Viking invaders who settled in the north and east of England from about the 8th century, just the sort of area where those speakers, northern speakers, came in Chaucer's Reeve's Tale. One of those languages associated with some Germanic tribes is the now extinct language called Gothic. And if we look at their verbs, we find that there is an S ending in those verbs. There are 2 verbs on the slide. I'm not going to try and pronounce them because my Gothic pronunciation would doubtless be wrong, but they're the verbs to save and to fill, and you can see that there are forms in those verbs which have an S on the end. There is a problem because those S endings are not the third person singular form, but the second person singular form. So we've got a little of a problem to explain why a second person form from languages like Gothic became a third person form in the Northumbrian dialect of Old English. We'll return to this problem at the end. Let's, for the moment, continue to look at the S form as it travelled slowly down towards London. It moved towards London, where it eventually took over from the th form. Here's a snapshot of its journey. In the 14th century, the Archbishop of York wrote a catechism which appeared in both Northern and Midland dialect versions. One of the phrases in the catechism is, in modern English, as St. John says in his Gospel. We, of course, today have that S form, says. The Northern version has that S as well, as St. John says in his Godspell. But look at the Midland version a little further south, where the form is the th, as St. John saith in his Gospel. Now here's an interesting aspect of the move southwards. Take a look at this graph which shows the comparative use by men and women. And you can see that in the use of S, which is what the graph shows, women were leading the way. This is quite often the case with linguistic innovations and leads some people towards the conclusion that as far as linguistic innovations are concerned, men are more conservative than women. By the time of Shakespeare, the S form had gained a lot of ground, but it hadn't finally won the battle. You find in Shakespeare both the th ending and the S ending. Take a look, for example, at these famous lines of Portia's from The Merchant of Venice. She says, "The quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. In this example, you have two th forms, droppeth and blesseth, and two s forms, gives and takes. Sometimes Shakespeare chooses one or other of these forms because he needs it for his metre, but this is not nearly always the case. You can even see a change in Shakespeare's lifetime. In the early plays, there are 239 th endings and 68 s endings, but in the later plays, there are 29 th endings and 185 s endings. And by the time we reach John Milton, there's an overwhelming predominance of s forms and very few th forms. Now, today, s truly has won the day. Th has disappeared more or less completely. But there are still some interesting things to say about the s form. One of them is that there are dialects where the s form is extended throughout the whole present tense. Here are some examples from the Berkshire dialect, Berkshire being a county to the west of London. I sees him every day. Here the speaker has put that s onto the first person. Instead of I see, it's I sees. Here are some other persons. We often stops in at that pub. You goes there sometimes too. They often buys us a drink. In those cases, the s form has been generalised to be used throughout the present tense. On the other hand, there are some dialects where the s is dropped entirely. It doesn't appear even in the third person singular. Here are three examples from dialects in East Anglia. It go up there with the scythe. Not goes up, but go up. And instead of that all depends, we have that all depend. And that turn on the cogwheel instead of that turns on the cogwheel. Well, these examples suggest that there's some fluidity in how these endings are used. The s is there, the s isn't there. And perhaps this gives us the answer to the problem we had about why the second singular form in Scandinavian and Germanic languages became the third singular form in the Northumbrian dialect. It didn't matter that much. There was an s ending and it moved from the second person singular to the third person singular. Well, that's the end of my second lockdown explorations in the history of English. Please look out for the third.